WNST. Been away, stuffing his face with pizza out on the internet and having a good time with his family, as everybody does in summertime. We welcome Luke Jones back on, and, I would say, Luke, some things change. Some things never seem to change too much. It's been a really, really hideous week of baseball. You can go back to Wildwood, my friend, eat some more pizza. Not much happening around here short of whenever they decide to deal Manny Machado, right, which even he's talking about now.
Yeah, no question about it. I think I was gone a week and a half, and the Orioles won all of one game. So you're right. Not much has changed other than now we're talking about 40-plus games under 500 rather than 30-plus. So the beat goes on in that regard.
Dude, I had written some of my snarky Dear Orioles letters that I've been doing out there you can go listen to and read and all that. And in one of them, I did put your 30 games under 500. And by the time I launched the blog, there were 40 games. Literally, I had to change 30 to 40. And I'm like, are they really 40 games under 500? I mean, I don't know how many teams have ever been 40 games under 500 on July 10th. I really don't know how many there have been. I would think you can count them on a hand or two, right?
Yeah, you would think it's not a very extensive list. And what's amazing, we've spent so much time talking about the Orioles, and rightfully so, when you're 40-plus under 500, but how about the Kansas City Royals are right there with them?
Loss for loss, suck for suck.
I mean, it's just it's amazing to think 4 years ago we were getting on a plane going to Kansas City for the ALCS, watching those two teams play, and obviously the Royals prevailing. But those two teams being where they are right now, the Royals, their saving grace is that they won a World Series. The Orioles got to an ALCS and no closer than that, and now both of those teams being where they are, and more specifically focusing on the Orioles being where they are to this point in the season and having not made a significant trade to this point, having not fired anyone to this point, it really is unfathomable that you would get this far down the road and be this bad without making any significant changes. And look, you know me, I've said all along I'm not the guy that's going to sit here and say, fire this guy, fire that guy, but just observing it and just the fact that no changes have been made in that regard, it really is astonishing. And
well, there's almost a shooting somebody and putting them out of their misery. I mean, Buck looks miserable. What is Buck going to say when Manny doesn't run out a ground ball as he did 2 weeks ago? I mean, it's a circus now. I mean, it literally, like, the circus is on, and I have no idea where the bottom of this pit is. I really don't know. There's no Juan Samuel coming over the bridge here to, manage this thing for 60 days, and I don't really think Buck wants to run away from it. I don't know that anybody there other than Duquette would like to run away from it. He tried to run away from it before. So, I don't want to portray these guys as running away from it, but someone has to go out and play the baseball games the next 3 months, right? Like that's no one's going to be watching sort of kind of except you and me, but someone's got to show up every day. This is when it gets really heavy and the 90-degree days feel like 110-degree days, like all of that. And the plane rides are long and there's nothing much to play for but the back of your bubblegum card or your next contract. But, such is life. That's where we are, but it does feel like some of these people would rather be somewhere else.
Well, I think that's human nature. Even young players, even those individuals that you would consider to be safe because they're under contract, no one wants to be there right now. And I don't mean that in any kind of a way that it's overly toxic, other than they're terrible. I mean, you're 41 games under 500 going into the final week before the AllStar break. No one wants to be involved in that. Now that's not to say that players aren't going out and still playing and playing for individual accolades, whatever it might be, playing for your next contract, playing to get traded elsewhere. But it is a really difficult environment when you're in this kind of a chasm, this kind of a complete canyon where you have no hope of climbing out of it. You have no hope of finishing 500 or anything of that nature. I mean, my goodness, this team has to win more games than it loses the rest of the way just to avoid losing 100 games at this point. So it just kind of shows you where they are. But when you're in this time of year where you're about 3 weeks out from the trade deadline, players are talking about it. Players are asking media, what are you hearing? players are asking each other, what are you hearing? Players are asking about coach's future, front office future, all of that. I mean, these guys aren't, as much as we try to think of professional athletes like they're robots and just go out and do your job and you have one focus, these guys are human beings too. And believe me, as much as horrendous as it's been and as much as you want to see accountability and as much as you look top to bottom and see problems everywhere you look in that regard, this isn't something where guys are happy about this. So it is a really difficult clubhouse right now. It is a really difficult environment right now for everyone. And again, you're just kind of waiting for the shoe to drop in terms of trades being made. To your point, as far as Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette, I mean, if they haven't been replaced at this point, I don't know if that's happening between now and the end of the season, and I'm not sure how much that part of it matters all that much. I mean, is there any consolation to avoiding losing 100 games? I don't know. All you're doing then is potentially damaging your draft pick. So from that standpoint, to me, it's all about the big picture and trying to complete trades, trying to start with the Machado trade, trying to deal anyone else you can in the process. And I really do think, as much as we focused on Manny and Adam Jones and obviously Zach Britton and Brad Brock and talking about their pending free agents, to me, everyone should be on the table at this point, because this is not something whatsoever that strikes me as you're going to turn this thing around quickly, or you're 2 or 3 off-season moves away from getting back into wild card contention. This is going to take something that's major surgery and something that's going to take at least a few years to get yourselves in good position again. And when you're dealing with that kind of timetable, there's no reason not to be entertaining offers for anyone, including the likes of Dylan Bundy or Kevin Gausman or Michael Givens or whoever else you want to throw into that equation. Because, again, I don't look at this thing and say, well, if they sign this guy and they trade for this guy and they sign this guy in the offseason, they're going to be a lot better. I don't see that at this point. And how can you when you're talking about a team that's already lost 65 games? So it really does become difficult in that way. But in the interim, as you mentioned, they have to play the games, and that's where this thing becomes very, very difficult on a day-to-day basis.
Anything you want to say about the AllStar Game and Machado? I know there's been a lot of conjecture that if he were dealt to the Dodgers or the Diamondbacks, the Phillies say they're out of it now. I've read rumors that the Dodgers have said no. And look, this is going to be posturing. I don't know at what point they get rid of him. I don't know if he'll make it to home plate tonight at Camden Yards, and they're home all week now, right? And what kind of a reception they're going to get, and how many Yankee fans are going to be in town this week, and all of that stuff. All that's going to, and obviously the Yankees and the Red Sox sit in the center of all of this, because Machado is going to affect one of those franchises as well before it's all over with. But it's a fascinating month in a lot of ways, and I do want to point this out. I think the Orioles can run and hide, and Angelos' awfulness and all of that went on for years and years, back when I was kicking and screaming and Free the Birds and trying to bring some national spotlight onto what's going on here. I don't think they're going to escape this. The awfulness of this and the Machado trade and the All-Star Game being in D.C. next week and all of that going on, how awful the Orioles are. And they're going to get pinatted here a little bit, because I see the national media piling on. They're a part of the story. And part of this story of dealing Machado off is for writers and media people to come in and hold their nose and do a drive-by as to how effed up the organization is right now all the way around. And I've seen Krasnick do it last week, Rosenthal. So it's not just, Dan Connolly and a couple of Oriole nerds around here wringing their hands about this. Everyone in Major League Baseball is looking at this now and saying, what's going on over there? I mean, how long are you guys going to be in last place this time?
Well, it just comes down to, the next thing is the trade market. That's the big thing for the next 3 weeks. You're not going to fire Dan Duquette now and hire someone now to try to execute trades in 3 weeks. So that's where they are at this point. There's plenty of incentive for Duquette as far as working for his next job, assuming he's not going to be back, and that's kind of been the expectation of among most people around here for the last year or two, by choice and by the whole, looking back at the whole Toronto thing. So you kind of work in the interim and you have to work in the short term. And as much as we're all wondering about the big picture, well, the big picture, you need to trade Manny Machado before that, because clearly they didn't hire a GM to be in place long term, and there's nothing to be done about that at this point. And there's nothing you can do about that at this point as far as impacting the trade market in the here and now. So you focus on those pieces. And
well, you better hope he doesn't get hurt this week. I mean, that's the thing I keep thinking about is, over the weekend, all the writers get lubed up. Rosenthal, Heyman, all these writers it's close. Things are accelerating. I don't believe, to me, it's like all the stuff that goes on at the winter meetings, but not in the same box of 48 hours of the rumors flying and all that. But there is this part where, like, boy, you better hope he doesn't trip over second base tonight. And to me, that's all the more reason to accelerate this thing if I'm them. That's all I'm saying,
Sure.
And especially where they were with Britton. So every time he comes up the home plate, if I'm them, that's a valuable piece of property. And the other part of this, and I mentioned this to my wife earlier, if you're going to hang on to him, you could have gotten rid of him a month ago. Dude, he's making $16 million. He's a $100,000 a day baseball player right now, literally. So every day they keep him, it's costing him almost $100,000 to have him.
Well, yeah, there are different tentacles to this, and we've talked about this all along. It's easy to say, trade him sooner. Teams, keep in mind, there's always that urgency. There's always those team needs. The Dodgers, we talked about this a couple months ago. It's hard to believe when their all-star shortstop goes down. And suddenly they become a good fit. So you're always waiting and trying to kind of massage that market to really gauge what team needs are, what team urgency is, where you are. But you're right. Every time you trot him out there, there's that risk that he can get hurt. And that's been true, really for, even going back to when he had his knee injuries, his surgeries in back-to-back years. But as you get closer to the deadline and that urgency picks up and you know that you have to trade him in the next 3 weeks or you're going to lose him and he's going to walk for a draft pick. So it is something that you run the risk of. I guess if you want to look from a positive standpoint, it does sound like talks are progressing. It does sound like they're getting closer. It does sound like even if the offers aren't exactly what they want, it sounds like the offers are better. And the interest is more serious than it was back in the winter, at least according to different things you hear. You don't always hear the same exact thing, depending on who you talk to. But
it's like Ozzie Newsome on draft night. We'll know what their best deal is. Whatever, whenever the deal is made, we'll know, right? I'm fascinated that the Yankees haven't been involved in this to some degree, that the Yankees haven't tried, right?
Yeah, I guess so. But the Yankees are doing pretty fun. They're not doing so bad right now to the point where they feel compelled that they have to make that move. And even if you look at where they are, they have Didi Gregorius at shortstop. Andujar has been really good for them, and heck, has been hitting in the middle of their lineup. So where do you put him? I hear you.
Well, he's probably not going to an American League team either. So if it's about beating Manny Machado, he's not going to be in Boston. So you don't have to worry about that. Right?
Well, there's been talk about Cleveland.
Okay.
That's been a team that's been there. But I guess my point is for the Yankees or for the Red Sox, certain teams, if you don't have a specific need on the left side of the infield, now's not necessarily the time that you're going to rattle the boat for a rental, and you're giving up good minor league pieces for the future. Now, the off season's a different time. That's when you can really reshape your franchise. You can make some trades. That's when you have time to take a deep breath and assess not just where you are right now, but in the next 5 years. All these teams right now vying for his services, and by multiple indications, it seems the Dodgers and the Brewers are two of the teams kind of at the top of the list. You're all about the now. You're all about the next 3 months. That's really what you're focused on, because you know that this guy's not going to re-sign without at least testing the market. So that's where I'm not as shocked that we haven't heard more from the Yankees or the Red Sox being in the mix, and certainly we could go back to the conversation as far as would the Orioles deal with either of those teams, which we know in the past they haven't been willing to, which is insane. But I think you're just trying to get to see which team blinks first, and I think with 3 weeks left, certainly there's an urgency to get this done sooner rather than later. But at the same time, and I've said this to you for the better part of the last 3 months, from the time that we saw that this thing was off the rails from mid-April, and it probably wasn't going to get better. You can only trade him once. And as much as you want to deal him to hypothetically maximize your return and avoid a situation where he gets hurt, you don't want to just make a trade for the sake of making a trade. So if you still feel that waiting another week, another 10 days, is going to get some team's best offer, then great. But you have to be able to gauge that accurately, and you run the risk, and this is where we get into the history of ownership here with trades. You run the risk of feeling like you're progressing with a trade offer, feeling like you're getting further and further and closer to the goal line with what teams A, B, and C, and then all of a sudden ownership wants different players, and you kind of move backwards, and then you start running out of time, and then potential suitors get frustrated, and they start moving on, and then all...
Well, the Phillies did that this weekend. I mean, McPhail said, I'm done. Klentek said, look, I know you cats. I worked over there. I'm not playing this game. I'm done.
At least for now. And look, how many times have you heard...
But that's a public pronouncement that's basically an FU. I mean, you don't call the media and make that pronouncement unless you've got some level of, I want to make a statement.
Right. Or unless you're a team like the Phillies that, is this the right time to make that move when you're just now entering your competitive window if you don't want to give up some of that young, controllable talent? I mean, you mentioned the AllStar Game, and we haven't even talked about that, but one of the things about the AllStar Game, when you look, 29 All-Stars aged 27 or younger, 21 foreign-born All-Star players. This is a young man's game. This is a global game, and teams are not as willing to just give away prospects as they were 10 years ago, as they were 15 years ago. So you do have a lot more reluctance in that regard.
Well, as a sport, and think about this, from ownership down, and this is something to think about as I write these Dear Orioles letters, there is a level of patience in baseball from a front office perspective that is sort of more built in than the NFL, where if I don't draft my franchise quarterback this year, I'm not going to have my job next year. In baseball, trading away those young parts and those pieces, ownership now understands the value, of what those young players represent to the finances of the company. And that stuff doesn't exist anymore because that is where ownership gets involved and says, we're not giving away Machado. We're not doing that because we need him on the field in 2020 or 21, or whomever that special piece is, that it really does become an incredible organizational decision for anyone that's going to give the Orioles anything of real value to rent Manny Machado. And if it's the Milwaukee Brewers, who seem like the most unlikely suitor of all, then you are now saying we're going hell in all for broke because we know we're only renting him for 8 weeks and we're giving away whoever are Eduardo Rodriguez or, name any of the Davies, the guys we've given away that become real Major League Baseball players. You're going to give that guy away for an 8-week rental. You better win the World Series. This better not be about, well, we just want to play a little bit in October and win our wild card game or whatever, right?
Right, but and we've seen this, we talked about this with the Orioles with Andrew Miller in 2014. I mean, there is no guarantee of winning the World Series, but winning matters, and trying to win a World Series matters, and there is a ton of value to that. And that's where you do make the argument of waiting closer to the deadline when teams are going to be a little bit, feel that urgency a little bit more. They're looking and seeing what their closest wild card contender, what they acquired recently. I mean, you have all those different tentacles to this. And that's where, if you are the Orioles, and we'll just use the Dodgers for example. There's been lots of talk about their top prospect their outfield prospect Alex Verdugo and their right-hander Yadier Alvarez. Those are just two names, two of many names, and I'm sure the Orioles.
I hear their last names, and I know why we didn't scout them now.
Oh, yeah, right. But my point is,
I wish I were deadpanning and just being funny, but it's pathetic. But it's true.
Well, it comes down to it. You got to do something about it, and there've been some indications, some whispers, and some of these national pieces that have been out there over the last couple of weeks have indicated perhaps Lou and John Angelos do want to get more involved in the international market, but that's not going to happen overnight. I mean, you got to have the scouting for that. You have to have you have to have just the wherewithal to go do it. I mean, it's not going to be something where you just say, okay, we're going to go from last to first. I mean, that takes time. That's going to take something that's going to build up for a couple years. But in the case of, going back to what I mentioned with the Dodgers, I mean, there's been talk about whether either of those individuals are made available. There have been conflicting reports, but maybe they're not available now, but maybe one of them becomes available a week from now as things get more urgent. And deadlines spurn action. You know that. I mean, that's a business principle, really in any...
Well, that's what the end of the month's all about for everybody. I mean,
sure,
and as much as we're going to spend all this breath on Machado, there's still Adam Jones, Britton, Brian. There's all sorts of things going on, including maybe somebody calling about Dylan Bundy. You know what I mean? Hey, we'll take Trumbo's deal from you, but you got to give us Bundy, and we'll send you back whatever, I don't know, but this is where having a really deft baseball person and someone this is where Andy McPhail was a genius, and this is where Ozzie Newsome is a genius, quite frankly. And we've seen some genius activity throughout sports where there are some people that are really, really good at doing this. They've been doing it for a long period of time in a lot of ways with a depth of organization, with a scouting system that they trust. I mean, I wonder if the Orioles could make a deal for Manny Machado. I wonder if the Orioles would like the A and AA prospects they would get back from themselves. You know what I mean? Whether any of their own players would pass their own muster,
Yeah, and I mean... Well, it's not something I've really thought about because they need to get their farm system back to a point where they have a core.
But if they had to trade for a Manny Machado, would they even have parts? Lord knows they haven't the last couple of years, right? Like, we've sort of heard they couldn't be in the market for that kind of a player because they didn't have the right kind of Dylan Bundys or Zach Brittons or whatever to deal on the other side when they were young, right?
Sure. Well, this is why they're in the position they're in now. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out. I mean, they clearly need to get their farm system up to a more palatable level. It's not, it's maybe a touch better than it was 2 years ago, let's say, but not where it needs to be. And that's why you trade guys like Manny Machado when you're out of the pennant race and you have no hope of competing anytime in the near future. And that's where you are right now. But, I mean, it's definitely a time where they need to pull the trigger. And you're right, it runs the risk of there being an injury or there being something that happens or just waiting too long and potential suitors get frustrated and then they go elsewhere. And before you know it, you had 6 or 7 teams vying for his services and you're down to 1 or 2. But very clear they need to replenish this farm system. They can do it with some trades now. It's going to take a lot more work. And to your point, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier in our conversation, all options should be on the table right now. There should not be a single player in this organization that is deemed untouchable. And if you can include, let's go back to our Dodgers example, if you can include a Michael Gibbons or a Brad Brock with Manny Machado, or include a Zach Britton with Manny Machado, and that helps you get Alex Verdugo, who, by the way, was in the amateur draft. He's from Arizona, not an international player, just to clear that out, as we mentioned. But if you can do those types of things, or here's another one for you, pick up a little bit of salary. Say you'll pay $2 million of Manny Machado's remaining salary the rest of the year to get better prospects. You should be doing it. And I'm not saying they will. Not saying that they're even thinking about doing that necessarily, but all of those options should be on the table because at the end of the day, the whole goal here is to try to acquire as much young talent as you can for 2021, 2022, and beyond.
And there's no indication that Duquette's any good at this, right? Like, at doing this part of the job.
I think that's a little unfair from a standpoint of, it's not as though this guy hasn't had a long career where he's made trades and made some good trades, and he's made some good trades here. He's made some bad trades here. You're never going to bat 1,000.
But he's not going to be here to see the fruit get ripe anyway.
Oh, but that doesn't mean he can't make good trades right now. The trades are one thing, and then what happens, that time will tell. I mean,
the whole premise of the guy deciding the future of the organization by picking these players is is patently absurd, quite frankly. I mean,
well,
behind all of this is this absurdity, right?
Well, I don't disagree with that, but this is where they are right now. I mean, we've been talking about what they should have done for the last year and a half in that regard, but that time has passed, and it's not. That's not what they're doing. So that said, Dan Duquette is, I'm sure, he's definitely auditioning for another job in baseball in some capacity. So it behooves him to try to make the best trade he possibly can, and hope then that everyone else in the organization that has a say is on board. I mean, that's kind of, we've talked about what exactly Duquette's role is. He's still been the one that's laid groundwork for a lot of these deals. It's just been a case of, well, what does Brady Anderson think? What does Buck Showalter think? What does the Angelos family think? So, but from that context, I'm not going to sit here and say I don't think Dan Duquette can get some good pieces for this team for the future. It's definitely odd that he's involved in that process, considering you don't expect him to be here beyond the end of the season. So that part of it. Sure, that's the black cloud that's hanging over the organization right now until they have some clarity, until they have made it clear who's going to be running the baseball ops side of things. But in the meantime, you kind of just focus on deals that can be made, and I think that deals can be made. And I know Buster Olney a few days ago put out a tweet from a rival executive saying that it seems like the Orioles have their stuff together a little bit more than they have in the past. They seem a little bit more focused. Now, that's one account. That might not be the truth. That might not be the gospel. But it's better seeing stuff like that and indications that they might be spending more in the international market moving forward. Much better seeing information like that out there than just the status quo of moving slowly, not getting things done, frustrating potential trade partners, and just not doing what you need to do for the future. So time will tell. I mean, 3 weeks from now, we're going to know if Manny Machado is dealt, and we'll have at least an idea of what the deal looks like on paper and what those prospects look like on paper. You never know, because you can look back at some of the biggest blockbusters in Major League history, and the pieces that that came in return for those big star players ended up not working out because they're prospects. There's no guarantee with it, but 3 weeks from now we'll have an indication of who's staying, who's going, and then all focus at that point will be on bringing up some younger players, and more importantly, what's this infrastructure of this organization going to look like in 2019 and beyond, because boy, they have a heck of a lot of work to do.
Luke Jones can be found, Baltimore Luke, on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net. Of course, you can find me anytime, anywhere. I am in the midst of the Dear Orioles series. You can read it. You can listen to it out in the Buy at Toyota.com audio vault. And, Luke, I'm doing something kind of cool next week. I know you did your AllStar Game in Miami last year. You and I went down there, ran around a little bit for a couple days, and I've done, 15 of them through the years. I'm going to the AllStar Game next week in D.C., taking my wife down. I'm going to go up and say something nice to Nick Markakis when I get the opportunity to do so. I know he was one of your favorites as well, and especially around the team. I know he still lives here in Baltimore, up in Hunt Valley. People bump into him all the time, but this has been a great story for him, hasn't it?
It really has been, and this is something that, as much as we've been frustrated watching the Orioles, and rightfully so, because they're the worst team in baseball and have been.
No. The Royals are giving them a run now. They're not.
Well, sure.
It's close.
I mean, it's that 2014 ALCS reunion.
Wouldn't it be unbelievable in this year with the Orioles, where they're actually worse than they were in '88 if they don't even get the #1 draft pick?
It'd be pretty crazy, right? It really would be, but. A lot of season to go in that regard as far as that part of
they can still suck more, I'm sure of it. But
yes. They could, but they also could play better at some point because, boy, it's tough to play this poorly this long. It really is.
Shouldn't have gotten rid of Markakis. I didn't say that at the time. I said it was a lot of money, and it was.
Well, it comes down to this with Nick Markakis. It's a great story. It really is. I mean, to see him putting up the numbers that he's put up, I mean, this is the best he's been since his second or third season, when at that point you were wondering if this guy was going to be the next great Oriole. And that never played out that way. He's been a good player for a long time, and it's really cool to see him be rewarded and appropriately recognized as a starter in the National League. He's been terrific. I mean, you're talking about an on-base percentage of just under 400, lots of extra base hits. He's been a big reason why Atlanta's been in contention this year. I do want to throw this out there. Go back and look at Nick Markakis' numbers from 15 through last season. He had a good on-base percentage, but the power was not there. It's not as though this guy went to Atlanta and has been a stud for the last 4 years. Now, that said, would it have suited the Orioles to agree to that fourth year and keep him in Baltimore, considering they haven't been able to find even adequate replacements for him? Sure. But, I've seen some people say this has been one of their worst decisions, letting him go.
I thought he was expensive, dude.
Right.
I thought, would I keep him? Yeah. Would I keep him at $10 million a year? Yeah, I don't know. He got 11 a year, right? That's what he got, right?
And let me throw a sabermetrics aspect to this, perspective to this. His wins above replacement, 2015, 1.7. 2016, 1.7. Last year, 0.7. Now, this year, 3 at the AllStar break, which shows how terrific he's been for Atlanta this year. But let's not completely. There are plenty of things to be unhappy with the Orioles about. That's clear.
Yeah.
Just look at the win-loss.
To me, this isn't one of them. For me,
I don't feel the Markakis thing. The big indictment, the big issue was not finding someone to even be as good as him. But he hasn't been that good over the last 4 years until this season. So it's been a great story. I'm really happy for Nick. He, in the same way that I can remember back to that mid-September night in 14 when they clinched the division and seeing him hold his kids, you could just see such a look of gratitude and such a look of relief, such a look of happiness in a guy that's really stoic. It's been cool to see that, and I know he was on ESPN's All-Star Selection show. It was really neat to see him in that forum, so very much looking forward to seeing him soak up All-Star Weekend, the All-Star Week, and have an opportunity to do that. And it's funny, one of the things he quipped about, I know for years and years was, wouldn't it be funny if I was a guy who had 2,500 hits, 3,000 hits, and never made an All-Star team? Well, I don't know about 3,000 hits, but he might finish with well over 2,500 and might be a guy that, but he can't say he's not an All-Star anymore. So pretty cool.
I'll see it with my own eyes is what I'll do. Yeah.
It's been neat.
Well, we'll have a lot of Baltimore people, I'm sure, going down to the Fan Fest and trying to score some tickets and the Home Run Derby and all that stuff. So it's not our All-Star game, but it's as close as we're going to get as long as the Angelos family owns the Orioles. Luke, I'll be checking in with you all week. I know we got football starting next week, so you're getting ready to jump on that. We've got our trip to Canton. I still have space. People are hitting me. Hey, can you still fit me on the bus? I'm like, which one? Because some of them are a little more sold out than others. I do have a lot of space left on the Trip B, which is the Friday, Saturday, Sunday trip. We're seeing the Indians. We're seeing the Pirates. Luke's going out for the game on Thursday. And, dude, we're a week away on football starting, so enjoy your time. Get back on the treadmill after all that pizza you ate down there in Wildwood and go watch this lousy baseball. And I know the nanosecond the Orioles deal Machado, we'll have it out on the WNST text service as well as all of our social media as well. So continuing to enjoy whatever this thing is, this calm before football begins, right?
Yeah, just waiting out the trade deadline, and we'll be on the backfield in Owings Mills before we know it.
The day after the All-Star game used to be the slowest sports day in the world, and it's the day the Ravens start camp. So we'll be treating it all differently around here. You can find Luke at WNST.net, Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. You can find me and all of my dear Orioles work out at WNST.net. The audio version's now available in the buyatoyota.com audio vault as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. I'm a very available individual. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, and anywhere your mobile device takes you. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.